I took the pills without a second thought. That was the mistake. They were supposed to help with my allergies, nothing more. I had taken the same brand for years, ever since my late 20s, when spring pollen started hitting me harder than it ever had before. 2 tablets, a glass of water, then bed. That was my routine. That Sunday night, I followed it exactly, standing alone in my small townhouse just outside Asheville, North Carolina, trying to quiet my nerves before the will reading scheduled for the next day. My sister had dropped the pills off herself that evening. Emily, my younger sister by 3 years. She stood in my kitchen with her coat still on, the faint smell of her expensive perfume mixing with the lemon cleaner I'd used on the counters. She said she was worried about me driving tired, about my allergies flaring up, about everything, really. She pressed the bottle into my hand like it was a favor, like it was love. I remember thinking it felt nice to be looked after for once. About 20 minutes after I swallowed the pills, something shifted. Not sleep, not relief. My arms grew heavy first, like someone had draped wet blankets over them. Then my chest tightened in a way I didn't recognize. My heart wasn't slowing down the way it usually did at night. It was pounding erratic, loud in my ears. I tried to stand up from the couch and nearly fell back down. The room tilted. The edges of my vision blurred, darkened, as if someone were slowly turning down a dimmer switch on the world. I told myself to breathe, that it was just anxiety, that tomorrow was a big day, and my body was reacting. But deep down, a colder thought cut through the haze. This didn't feel like allergies. I crawled toward the coffee table, my fingers numb and clumsy as I reached for my phone. I didn't remember deciding to call for help. I only remember the sound of my own breathing, shallow and uneven, and the panic that bloomed when my tongue felt thick in my mouth. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the orange glow of the lamp I'd forgotten to turn off. When I woke up, bright lights stabbed into my eyes. Machines beeped in steady rhythms that didn't belong to my body. A nurse was speaking calmly, asking me to squeeze her fingers to tell her my name. My throat felt dry and sore, like I'd been screaming. They told me later that if I'd gone to sleep instead of collapsing, I might not have woken up at all. As the fog slowly lifted, one thought rose above the rest, sharp and terrifying in its clarity. The will reading was scheduled for Monday morning, my aunt's estate. The one thing she had insisted on, according to the lawyer, was that I be there in person. If I missed it, everything would move forward without me. I lay there in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, my body weak and buzzing, realizing just how close I'd come to losing more than my life. And for the first time, a question I had never dared to ask settled heavily in my chest. What if this wasn't an accident at all? I woke up on Monday to the quiet hum of machines and the soft gray light of early morning filtering through the hospital blinds. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the weight of my body registered all at once. My limbs felt heavy as if they belonged to someone else. There was a dull ache behind my eyes, and my mouth tasted faintly metallic. When I tried to sit up, a nurse was suddenly there, steadying me with practiced hands and telling me to take it slow. It was just after 6:30 in the morning. The doctor came in not long after, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a calm, measured voice. He explained that what I'd experienced wasn't an allergic reaction at all. The pills I'd taken contained a strong sedative one that could slow breathing and heart rate enough to become life-threatening, especially combined with fatigue. He said it plainly without drama. If you'd gone straight to bed, he told me, we might be having a very different conversation. That sentence stayed with me long after he left the room. A little later, while I was staring at the pale square of sunlight on the floor, my phone vibrated on the side table. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "This is Thomas Reed," the voice said. "I'm calling from Reed and Holloway. I'm the attorney handling your Aunt Margaret's estate." My chest tightened, not from the medication this time, but from something sharper. He told me that the will reading was still scheduled for that morning at 10 o'clock at his office in downtown Asheville. He paused before continuing, then reminded me of something he'd said the week before. Margaret had been very clear. There was a clause that required my physical presence for a specific portion of the will to be read. No proxies, no exceptions. "I was informed you were hospitalized," he said carefully. "I wanted to check whether you would still be able to attend." I looked down at my hands pale against the white sheets and felt the weight of that question settle into my bones. If I didn't show up, whatever Margaret had set aside for me would move forward without me. Legally, cleanly, final. I told him I would call back as soon as I knew more. After I hung up, I lay there listening to the distant sounds of the hospital waking up, carts rolling, voices in the hallway. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed. Life going on, indifferent to how close mine had come to stopping. My mother called around 8. Her voice was brisk, controlled. She said she'd heard what happened and hoped I was feeling better. She mentioned, almost casually, that Emily was already on her way to the lawyer's office to help with the paperwork. She didn't ask what the doctors had said. She didn't ask how serious it had been. Before hanging up, she added, "Don't push yourself. Margaret wouldn't have wanted you driving in this condition." I stared at the phone after the call ended, something cold and familiar settling in my stomach. This wasn't the first time decisions had been made around me instead of with me. It was just the first time the consequences felt permanent. A nurse came in to check my vitals and mentioned that discharge paperwork could be started later in the morning, depending on how I felt. Later in the morning, after 10. I turned my head toward the window, watching the sky brighten inch by inch, and understood something with sudden clarity. Whether I showed up to that will reading or not, my family was already prepared to move on without me. Emily arrived just after 9, while the hallway outside my room was still quiet. I knew she was coming before I saw her. I heard her voice first, soft and familiar, thanking the nurse at the station, asking which room I was in. When she stepped inside, she looked exactly the way a worried sister was supposed to look. Hair pulled back neatly, minimal makeup, a cardigan draped over her arm like she'd rushed out of the house without thinking about herself. "There you are," she said gently, crossing the room in quick, careful steps. "God, you scared us. Us, not me." She sat in the chair beside my bed and reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. If I hadn't been lying there with an IV taped to my arm, I might have believed every word that followed without question. She told me how relieved everyone was that I was awake, how Mom hadn't slept much, how lucky it was that I'd collapsed instead of going to bed. She said the doctor told her I'd be fine with rest, that the worst was over. Then almost seamlessly, she shifted. "You really shouldn't be thinking about anything stressful today," she said. "That will reading can wait. Margaret wouldn't want you dragging yourself out of here like this." I watched her face as she spoke the careful concern, the way her eyes flicked briefly to the clock on the wall. 9:10. 50 minutes before 10 o'clock. "I already told Mom I'd handle things," she added. "I'm heading downtown anyway. I can make sure everything goes smoothly." There it was. The offer wrapped so neatly in kindness, it almost disappeared. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the bag she'd placed on the small table beside the bed, a familiar white pharmacy bag folded at the top. My name written in black marker, neat and precise. Inside, I knew was the same bottle of pills she'd brought me the night before. She must have picked it up when she stopped by my house after the ambulance left. "You kept the bottle," I said. Her expression didn't change, but something in the room did. A tightening, a barely perceptible pause. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I thought the doctors might want to see it." That made sense. It did, and yet the longer I looked at that bag, the more unsettled I felt. Emily started talking again, filling the silence. She reminded me how fragile family moments could be, how complicated estates were, how much easier things were when one person took charge. She had always been good at that, taking charge, speaking for both of us, making decisions sound like favors. I thought about all the times she'd handled things for me over the years. Forwarded mail I never remembered receiving. Calls she said she'd returned on my behalf. Forms she'd filled out because I was too busy. At the time, I'd been grateful. Now lying there in a hospital bed, I realized how rarely anyone had actually asked what I wanted. Emily squeezed my hand again. "Just rest," she said softly. "I've got this." She stayed a few more minutes chatting lightly about traffic downtown and how cold the office buildings always were. Then she kissed my cheek and stood up, already half turned toward the door. As she left, she picked up the pharmacy bag and tucked it under her arm. "I'll bring it back later," she said. "After everything's sorted." The door closed behind her with a quiet click. I stared at the spot where she'd been sitting, my heart beating a little faster now, not from medication, but from something sharper, something colder. For the first time, the question that had crept into my mind earlier took on weight and shape. What if Emily didn't just want me to rest? What if she needed me to stay right where I was? By late morning, the hospital had grown louder. It was still Monday. The same day, everything was supposed to be decided without me. I had been moved out of the observation unit and into a regular room, cleared to sit up, drink water, think. That last part turned out to be the most dangerous. Once Emily left the quiet she took with her pressed in on me. I couldn't sleep. My body was weak, but my mind kept circling the same few details over and over like a tongue worrying a sore tooth. The pills, the timing, and how easily she had stepped into my place. I asked the nurse for my phone and my purse. When she set them on the tray table, I noticed something immediately. My house keys were missing. I told myself there was an innocent explanation. Emily must have taken them when she went to check on my place the way she'd done before. That was what she always said, checking, helping, making sure nothing was overlooked. Still, the absence felt heavier than it should have. I opened my email and searched my inbox for anything related to my aunt's estate. There were fewer messages than I remembered. The thread from Thomas Reed was there, but it jumped from his first notice straight to his reminder call that morning. No follow-up questions, no confirmations, as if some part of the conversation had never happened. I checked my spam folder. Nothing. Then I went back further. Months back. Years. There were gaps, small ones at first. A utility notice I didn't remember resolving. A forwarded message from my mother that I had no memory of receiving. A scanned document I had apparently signed, though I couldn't recall doing it. Each thing on its own meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. Emily had always been good with details, better than me, everyone said. She remembered dates, deadlines, phone numbers. When our father died, she had handled the paperwork while I grieved. When our mother downsized, Emily coordinated the sale. When mail went missing, she laughed it off and said the post office was a mess. I had let her. Around noon, I asked if I could speak to the hospital pharmacist. It took some waiting, but eventually a woman in a white coat came by with a tablet tucked under her arm. I showed her the photo I'd taken of the pill bottle label the night before, one I'd snapped out of habit more than suspicion. She frowned as she compared it to the medication record on her screen. These tablets don't match the prescription, she said finally. Not in dosage, not in formulation. My pulse quickened, steady but insistent. Could it have been a manufacturing error, I asked. She shook her head. No, this isn't a mix-up at the pharmacy. These pills came from a different medication entirely. A different medication. Deliberate. Controlled. After she left, I sat very still, staring at the blank wall across from me. For years, I had told myself that the small inconveniences in my life were my own fault, that I was forgetful, passive, too trusting, that if something went wrong, it was because I hadn't paid close enough attention. Now I saw it differently. Every time I'd stepped back, someone else had stepped forward. Every time I'd gone quiet, decisions had been made for me. The pills weren't an isolated mistake. They were just the most dangerous expression of a habit that had been forming for a long time. In the early afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Emily said, "You're resting. We'll talk later." No question mark. No concern. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of something new settle in my chest. Not fear, not yet. Something steadier, sharper. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if I was wrong. I was wondering how far this went. The confirmation came quietly, without drama, late Monday afternoon. I was sitting upright by then, a thin blanket folded across my legs, watching shadows lengthen along the hospital wall. The pharmacist returned with a printout. This time, a few stapled pages she handed to me as if they carried weight. They did. She walked me through it slowly. The prescription on file was a standard allergy medication, low-dose refill authorized weeks earlier. The tablets I'd ingested according to the lab analysis were something else entirely. A prescription-only sedative, significantly stronger than anything I'd ever been prescribed. Not something that could be confused on a shelf. Not something that happened by accident. These don't come from the same supply chain, she said. Someone had to replace them. Replace. Not mix up. Not mislabel. Replace. I thanked her and watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her. The room felt smaller after that, tighter, like the walls had shifted inward by an inch. I didn't call Emily. I didn't text my mother. I sat there and let the truth settle, because once it did, I knew I wouldn't be able to put it back where it had been. There was no longer a question of whether something was wrong. There was only the question of what to do about it. I asked the nurse for my discharge paperwork. She looked surprised, checked my chart, then nodded. It would take some time, she said. Observations, signatures, instructions. I told her I understood. I also asked if I could have copies of my medical records related to the incident. For your primary care doctor, she asked. For myself, I said. While I waited, I made a different call. Thomas Reed answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, professional, but I caught the hesitation when I told him I was still in the hospital. I need you to know something, I said. The medication I took was switched. It wasn't an accident. There was a pause, papers shifting on his end. That's serious, he said finally. Are you safe? I looked down at the IV mark on my arm already fading. I will be, I said, and I'll be there tomorrow. Tomorrow meant Tuesday, the next business day. I couldn't make the reading on Monday, and I didn't pretend otherwise. But I wasn't stepping aside either. He exhaled, slow and careful. There may be options, he said, given the circumstances. I'm not asking for favors, I told him. I'm asking you not to let anything move forward without me. That, he said, I can do. When I hung up, my phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from Emily. Everything went fine today. We'll talk when you're feeling better. No details. No questions. Just a conclusion she'd already reached. I didn't respond. As evening crept in, a police officer knocked gently and stepped into my room. He introduced himself as Officer Daniel Ruiz, Asheville Police Department. Calm, direct. He said the hospital had reported a suspected medication tampering incident, standard procedure when there's potential criminal exposure. I told him what I knew, what I didn't. I handed over the printout, the photo of the bottle label, the timeline as best I could reconstruct it. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't need to. When he left, promising to follow up, I lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. My heart was steady now, my breathing even. This was the moment things could have gone loud, emotional, confrontational. Instead, I chose quiet. I would rest. I would recover. And I would walk into whatever came next with my eyes open, because now I knew the truth, and that changed everything. I arrived downtown just before 10 on Tuesday morning, moving slower than usual, but steadier than I felt. The night at home had been restless. I barely slept, not from pain, but from the strange clarity that comes when denial finally runs out of places to hide. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I showered, dressed carefully, and chose clothes that made me feel grounded. Nothing dramatic, nothing fragile. I tucked my discharge papers and the pharmacist's printout into my bag, not because I planned to show them, but because I needed to know they were with me. Thomas Reed's office sat on the second floor of a brick building on a quiet street near the courthouse. I had been there once before years ago when my Aunt Margaret had updated her will. Back then, I'd sat silently while Emily handled most of the conversation, confident and efficient, as if the room naturally belonged to her. This time, when I pushed open the glass door, every head turned. My mother was seated at the long conference table, her purse neatly arranged at her feet. Emily sat beside her legs crossed, posture relaxed, already in control. A cousin I barely spoke to nodded stiffly. For a fraction of a second, no one spoke. Then Emily smiled. It was small, practiced, and unmistakably surprised. "You're here," she said, standing halfway from her chair. "I thought I know," I said gently. So did everyone else. Thomas Reed cleared his throat and gestured toward the empty chair at the table. "We're glad you could make it," he said. His eyes lingered on me just long enough to convey that he understood the effort it had taken. As I sat down, I felt the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle realignment of space and attention. The room no longer revolved around Emily. The reading began. Formal language, legal phrasing, assets listed carefully, methodically. I listened, but my focus kept returning to the people around the table. Emily's knee bounced once, then stilled. My mother avoided my eyes. Halfway through, Thomas paused. "There is an addendum," he said, lifting a separate document. Per Margaret's instructions, this portion was to be addressed only if all named parties were present. Emily straightened, her expression tightening just slightly. The addendum acknowledged a specific bequest reserved for me contingent on my appearance. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the fact that it existed at all, that my aunt had anticipated resistance, delay, interference. Emily let out a quiet breath through her nose. "This seems unnecessary," she said lightly. "We've already spent a lot of time on logistics." I turned toward her. "I'm sure it feels that way." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Before Thomas could respond, there was a knock at the door. Not tentative, firm, deliberate. When it opened, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The room went very still. One of them glanced at a notepad, then looked up. "We're looking for a woman named Emily Carter," he said. For the first time since I'd walked in, Emily didn't speak. No one did. I watched the color drain from her face as the weight of that moment settled over the table. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I had shown up. That was the first step. The question didn't land all at once. It spread. "Who is Emily Carter?" the officer asked again, slower this time, his eyes moving deliberately around the table. Emily's mouth opened, then closed. For a heartbeat, she looked like someone searching for a script that had suddenly gone missing. My mother was the first to react. She straightened in her chair, confusion tightening her face. "There must be some mistake," she said. "That's my daughter." The officer nodded politely. "Ma'am, we're aware of that. We're asking about a separate identity." Emily let out a small laugh, brittle and too loud for the room. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I've been here the whole morning. You can ask anyone. The second officer stepped forward, introducing himself as Detective Laura Kim. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "We're not here about the will," she said. "We're here because the name Emily Carter appears on multiple records connected to a medication tampering investigation." My pulse spiked. Not fear recognition. Detective Kim turned toward me. "Ms. Harris," she said, using my last name for the first time. "We spoke briefly yesterday at the hospital. We have reason to believe the person who replaced your medication used an alternate name at the pharmacy." Emily shook her head sharply. "That's insane," she said. "I picked up the prescription as a favor. I didn't sign anything." "That's not what the records show," Detective Kim replied. She placed a folder on the table but didn't open it. The pickup was signed under the name Emily Carter, using an ID issued 2 years ago. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Emily stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "You can't just come in here and accuse me of something like that," she snapped. "My sister was sick. She's confused. She's been under medication." There it was, the counterstrike. Detective Kim turned to me again. "For now, we need to ask you a few questions privately," she said, "and we need you to understand that this may delay the estate proceedings." The word delay hit harder than I expected. I felt the room tilt just slightly. This wasn't how I'd imagined it unfolding. I had come to be present to prevent decisions being made without me. Now, everything was grinding to a halt with me at the center of it. Thomas Reed spoke up carefully. "Given the circumstances, we'll adjourn," he said. "Nothing will move forward today." Emily's eyes snapped toward him. "You can't do that." "I can," he said evenly, "and I am." As the officers guided Emily toward the door for questioning, she twisted around to look at me. Her face had hardened, the practiced warmth stripped away. "You think you've won something?" she said quietly. "You have no idea what you've just started." The door closed behind her. I sank back into my chair, my legs trembling now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go. Detective Kim crouched slightly so we were eye level. "This may get complicated," she said. "She's already claimed she was acting out of concern, that she was protecting you from stress." I nodded. I'd expected that. Emily had always known how to frame control as care. When everyone else filed out, leaving the room strangely empty, I sat alone for a moment, staring at the scuffed surface of the conference table. My plan had been simple: show up, stay visible, don't let myself be erased. Now I understood something more difficult. Showing up had cost me control, but it had also done something else. It had forced the truth into the open where it could no longer be smoothed over or explained away. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in the hospital." I slipped the phone back into my bag, my hands steady. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. By Wednesday morning, the noise had settled into something sharper and more manageable. I woke early, not because I was rested, but because my mind had finally chosen a direction. The chaos of the day before the stairs, the accusations, the message from an unknown number had stripped away any illusion that this could be handled quietly or politely. If I hesitated now, the story would be written for me. I returned to Thomas Reed's office just after 9. The conference room was empty. This time, the long table cleared of coffee cups and tense bodies. He met me with a thin folder in his hands and a look that told me the situation had moved overnight. "They've widened the scope," he said once we were seated. "The medication incident opened doors." He explained that the signature used to collect my prescription had been flagged. The alternate ID, Emily Carter, wasn't just a name scribbled on a receipt. It connected to a pattern. Pharmacy records in 2 counties. A forwarding request placed on my mail 6 months earlier. A temporary access authorization filed with my aunt's bank naming Emily as a point of contact in case of emergency. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, it formed a map. I felt a familiar tug of guilt, the reflex to explain it away. Emily had always been helpful, proactive, the family problem solver. But guilt wasn't evidence, and evidence was finally on the table. Detective Kim joined us shortly after, her notebook already open. She didn't waste time. She laid out what they had and what they needed. Timelines, access points, motive. She was careful with her language, precise, but the implication was clear. "This wasn't a single bad decision," she said. "It looks like a strategy." That word landed hard. I told her what I hadn't said before about the missing keys, the gaps in my email, the forms I didn't remember signing. I handed over my phone and consented to a forensic review. It felt like letting go of control, but this time it was deliberate. In the early afternoon, my mother called again. Her voice shook now, the confidence gone. She said Emily had told her I was exaggerating, that stress had made me paranoid. She asked if we could all sit down and talk as a family before things went any further. I closed my eyes and pictured the conference table from the day before, the way the room had gone silent, the way the truth had resisted being smoothed over. "I won't do that," I said gently. "Not anymore." After the call, I walked downtown alone, letting the late summer air steady me. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to control, not over the outcome, but over my own role in it. That evening, Detective Kim called with the update that changed everything. A search of Emily's car had turned up the pharmacy bag. Inside were unused tablets from the sedative batch still sealed, along with a receipt bearing the alternate name. The timeline matched perfectly. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. I sat at my kitchen table long after the call ended, my hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. The pieces were finally aligning, not because I'd pushed harder, but because I'd stopped trying to protect anyone from the consequences of their choices. Tomorrow, there would be statements, formal charges eventually. The estate would remain frozen until the investigation concluded. I wasn't rushing toward revenge. I wasn't interested in watching anyone fall. I was reclaiming something quieter and more durable, my voice. And this time, it was being heard. By Friday, the consequences had names, not accusations anymore, not suspicions. Actual charges written in language that didn't bend to family history or good intentions. Detective Kim called that morning to let me know that Emily had been formally charged with felony medication, tampering, and identity fraud. Additional counts were pending, tied to the forged authorization and the use of the alternate ID. She's been released on bond, Kim said, but her access to anything related to the estate is terminated, effective immediately. I thanked her and hung up, sitting very still on the edge of my bed. I felt no rush of satisfaction, no relief, just the quiet certainty that the ground had finally shifted. An hour later, my parents came to my house. They hadn't called first. I saw their car pull into the driveway and knew instinctively that this conversation had been building for years. My mother looked smaller than I remembered when she stepped inside, her purse clutched tightly to her chest. My father avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the framed photo of my Aunt Margaret on the hallway wall. My mother spoke first. She said she never thought it would go this far, that Emily had told her everything was handled, that the forged paperwork had seemed harmless temporary, a way to keep things simple. I listened without interrupting. My father finally looked at me then. His voice was rough. We should have asked more questions, he said. We should have checked. That was the truth laid bare and late. I told them I wasn't there to punish anyone, but I wasn't going to protect anyone either. Not anymore. I explained that the investigation would continue with or without my cooperation, and that I had already provided everything I had: emails, records, timelines, silence too when it mattered. My mother began to cry, then quietly, the way people do when they realize the cost of their own inaction. She asked if I would write a letter on Emily's behalf, something to show the judge that this was all a misunderstanding, that family stood behind her. I shook my head. This didn't happen because of one mistake I said. It happened because too many people looked away. They left not long after, their steps slower than when they'd arrived. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it for a moment, breathing through the ache in my chest. That afternoon, Thomas Reed called to confirm that the estate would remain frozen until the legal process concluded. The bequest tied to my presence was secure, untouchable, exactly as Margaret had intended. Emily tried to contact me once. A voicemail left late that night. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it I heard the strain. She said she'd only been trying to help, that I was overreacting, that family didn't do this to each other. I deleted the message without replying, because family had already done this to me. The stakes were clear now. Not just money, not just legal outcomes, but the permanent reshaping of who stood where and why. I had chosen visibility over comfort, truth over peacekeeping, and the cost of that choice was real, but so was the strength it had given me. The paperwork took months, but the decision itself was quiet. By early autumn, the case had settled into its final shape. Emily accepted a plea deal that acknowledged the charges without dragging the family through a public trial. The court ordered restitution and a suspended sentence tied to long-term supervision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was proportionate. And it was final. The estate moved forward shortly after. I sat in Thomas Reed's office again, this time lone, the windows open to a mild breeze that carried the smell of leaves turning. Margaret's bequest was transferred exactly as she had outlined. No shortcuts, no substitutions, no one speaking for me. The amount mattered less than the clarity of it. For the first time, something had been handled without interference. I drove home afterward and stopped by my aunt's house, now empty and ready for sale. I walked through the room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the kitchen counter, where she used to lean and tell stories. In the bottom drawer of her desk, I found a small envelope with my name written in her careful hand. Inside was a note she'd written years ago. She said she worried about me because I was too accommodating, that I had a habit of stepping back to keep the peace. She told me she admired my kindness, but hoped I would learn to protect it. I folded the note and put it in my bag. My parents and I speak now, but differently. There are limits. There are pauses. We don't pretend things didn't happen. We don't rush to make each other comfortable. It's slower and it's honest. Emily hasn't contacted me again. I don't know if she ever will. I've stopped trying to imagine what she thinks I owe her. What I owe myself is simpler. I changed my routines. I double-check my mail. I ask questions. I say no without apologizing. These aren't acts of bitterness. They're acts of care. Some evenings, I sit on my back steps and listen to the neighborhood settle, dogs barking once, then quiet, a porch light clicking on down the block. The world feels steady again. Not perfect, just solid enough to stand on. I didn't win anything by losing my sister. I didn't come out stronger because something broke. I came out clearer. I learned that being present is not the same as being safe. That silence can look like peace while it's costing you everything. And that justice, when it's real, doesn't shout. It restores balance and then steps back. What I walked away with wasn't revenge. It was my life returned to me intact. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear what you think. How do you define justice when family is involved? If you found something meaningful here, consider subscribing and staying with us for the next story.